Hey folks, hope everyone is doing well. Today I plan to answer the question, how good is this $200 longsword? I purchased this from Swordier's eBay. The name of it is the Featherstrike Bastard Sword. The model number is SWM1013 by their categorization. Out of the box it had good edge sharpness. It could cut paper better than expected. And if I flip the blade over here, even after crushing over a dozen aluminum cans, it is still sharp enough to cut paper at least somewhat. One cool thing about the sword that I appreciate is the blade retention. They put some of the same imitation leather on the inside of the scabbard mouth, and you can even drop the sword. That's actually pretty cool. The blade is pretty rigid. It's hard to bend by hand, but when smacked on the pommel, it resonates a lot, more than expected, and the point of percussion is just shy of 2/3 up the blade. I like the overall handle shape. It's a flattened oval near the crossguard, and by the end of the grip it transitions to circular to match the pommel. According to Swordier's website, the blade is made out of 65 Mn spring steel, and this one arrived excessively convex, almost octagonal in places, which we'll get to in a minute. Out of the box, everything seems solidly put together. The cord wrap is well done, and I appreciate how the handle merges with the pommel like this. One odd thing about the sword is the peen on the bottom. It has this weird kind of inset around it. I've never seen that before, but anyway, that's just how it is. One problem I have with the sword is the crossguard. It sits off kilter. It doesn't appear to be built to be tightly fit, more of a large rectangular hole that's later filled in with epoxy. Also, the crossguard developed a slight rattle after only the 4th time using it, which is kind of annoying because it doesn't leave me much space to insert a shim or anything into. Another problem I have with the sword is the weight. It was listed at 1,090 grams and arrived almost 140 grams heavier. I'd like to draw your attention here to the blade profile. Rather than a crisp diamond shape, it's borderline lenticular at the base, almost dome-shaped, with poorly defined planes, though it does slim out slightly further up the blade. Another problem is the lack of distal taper. The total distal taper is only a little over a millimeter along the 34 inches of length, which I feel is not enough and contributes to the blade being excessively heavy. The reason this matters to me is that I bought this as a 1.5-hand sword, meaning I could cut with it with one hand. I have a lot of trouble putting enough force into the sword with only one hand or controlling it to a stop. The sword feels much more at home in 2 hands than one. Despite the thick blade, it went okay the first time cutting bottles. I found the factory sharpness was basically enough, though you can hear how thick the blade is as it passes through the target, that low thump sound. I also had about twice as many fails with the sword as I'd care to admit. If I deviated from exactly the point of percussion, or with any loss of edge alignment, it responded in a way that I found punishingly uncooperative. It turned out to be difficult splitting an aluminum can down the center with this sword. And while I did get some to split, more often not, the can crumpled rather than cut. I figured this would actually be a lot easier to do than it is. Partly, I guess, it's the thickness of the sword. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, ordinarily, this would be a recipe for all sorts of edge damage. But because the convex of the sword is so thick, and the blade well tempered, there was only surface scratching and the odd minor ping on the edge, even after 15 strikes to the cans. So given that the blade has more durability than performance to work with, I decided to give it a minor reprofiling. My goal here is to follow and refine the original curvature of the cutting planes, basically just to smooth it over and make it less abrupt. It's still fairly thick approaching the edge. It's not that big of a change, but at least it could have a better chance than before. So happily, I was rewarded with a lucky static cut afterwards. That was a fun one. The sword was moving smoother through some of the same cuts as before, though I could still feel the lack of distal taper, where the blade wanted to pull me around if I overswung. I thought at this point that splitting the cans would be no problem with the sharper edge and keener profile. It turns out maybe this is not the best test for a sword's cutting ability. To be honest, it's kind of frustrating compared to splitting bottles the same way. Even so, I did get a couple okay splits. This last one was my best, with finally a nice clean 50-50. Looking at the blade after the second round of cans, it had nearly the same effect as before. A few minor pings on the edge, nothing serious, mostly just shallow scratches. It's nice to have a semi-invincible sword, but in an effort to get it cutting cleaner yet, I decided to refine the blade profile once again to get it properly sharp. Here's a different kind of can target, something I've had fun with before. Rather than being a simple durability test, this is a much more technically demanding target to cut. I think it does a good job showing the improvement in cutting performance and the potential that the sword has. I was pretty pleased with how this went. Even just playing around with the horizontal cuts and the upward cuts, the sword felt a lot smoother this time. I also decided to have a go at some double cuts. One difference here between this and a better balanced sword is that I have to swing a lot lighter so the heavy blade doesn't have the chance to yank me around from excess momentum. Anyway, I'm a lot happier now with the sword than I was before. The doubles went really well here. I was able to land 3 back to back without any trouble, with the last one being particularly satisfying to land. So that's all for this review, if you can call it that. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you to Alex at Swordier for hearing my complaints. Since Alex mentioned, I'm excited to see what an updated version of the sword would be like, if the profiling, distal taper, and crossguard could all be sorted out. And if Swordier is serious about sending me that replacement, I'd be happy to receive it and compare it in the future. So that's it for the video for now. Thanks again and have a good day.